Hi, everybody. I wanted to give a couple of quick thank yous, RJ especially, the Denver Art Museum, and my Denver Art Museum fan club. The Fancy Tiger Clothing staff. My mom sent me some family photos that I think you'll love, and especially the wonderful, incomparable Andy Lyons. I'm here to talk about change, which in my primary field of classical music does not come very quickly. It took church musicians about 200 years to decide that it was okay to sing chants in harmony. Then it took about 800 more years to decide that you could play any note you wanted, regardless of whether they sounded pleasing or had a relationship with each other. That concept did not hold popular for long, but it's an important part of the change in music history. Change nowadays seems to be a buzzword, especially in local ads I found. Change your smile, change your life. Change your hair, change your life. Slogans aside, I think there's the start of an idea here that trying something new and stepping outside of your comfort zone or the norm can lead to transformation down the road. That's what I've been challenging myself to do in my own work. I should say right off the bat, I didn't always want to be a classical musician. Growing up, I liked playing music most of the time, but I loved writing music. This was my first piece ever, which was written almost 20 years ago to the day. Like many musicians, I started off with piano, but I didn't think of myself in the way that I learned about classical music. I wasn't brought up in a prestigious academy. I was certainly not a prodigy like Mozart. I was middle class, growing up in the woods, near a small town. My family owned a Harley-Davidson shop. So I grew up around long-haired, tattooed bikers all day, whose exposure to classical music usually amounted to that time that Pink Floyd played with the symphony. But I tried a lot of things out. I played the clarinet and got to first chair in high school band. I sang in choirs and played in church. I tried the harp. I'm not saying that all male harpists are gay, but this one was, but he didn't realize it at the time. Later in college, I was the only harpsichordist, but I was more attracted to the instrument because my idol, Tori Amos, played one. Caught a light sneeze, caught a light breeze, caught a light weight, lightning seed. Boys on my left side, boys on my right side, boys in the middle, and you're not here. But none of those things I did felt like classical music to me. I didn't even like Bach all that much. And I had other conceptions about art music. Classical music was the omnipotent Beethoven and his death mask. At best, it was a good film score, and at worst, it was long, boring, elitist, and opaque. It was busking in the subway for spare change. And above all, it was a whole lot of dead white guys. But now that I can see that all these things, the harp, the clarinet, the Beethoven, the elitism, even the dead white guys, they're all a part of classical music. And some of these things I've actually grown to love. But there is so much more to the field than I ever imagined. I've changed my own conceptions of what classical music is and how it gives my life meaning. My worldview expanded when I walked into my advisor's office at Vassar, and he was playing music for 18 musicians by Steve Reich. We'll give you a little clip of that. For a boy who'd grown up in rural Western New York, I had no idea that these kinds of musics existed. Minimalism, these small, gradually shifting ideas, became a huge influence on me. Even better, that piece was written by a guy who's not even dead yet. I started devouring music made by living composers. I learned about all the non-traditional ways you could play piano, including on the insides, largely pioneered by John Cage. He would stick rubber erasers, nuts and bolts, and all sorts of things into the piano, turning it into a percussion instrument. My own music started to change dramatically, and I started to find my compositional voice. I dove into experimental works by composers like George Crumb. Crumb designs beautiful scores that we now call graphic scores because they're not in our usual straight line notation. Just at them might evoke some deeper feeling in the music, and you don't even have to be able to read the music. I use some of these graphic notation ideas in pieces with Irish visual artist Rona Byrne. We created a graphic score for people of any or no musical skill. Vocalists make small sounds that when you put them all together, they replicate the noises of a specific wooden roller coaster in Pittsburgh called the Racer. We brought the piece to a convention of roller coaster enthusiasts who then got to perform it as a coaster choir. I discovered composer John Luther Adams while at my master's at Carnegie Mellon. Some of his pieces are stark and indescribably subtle, inspired by his adopted home of Alaska. Now he's writing music for musicians playing outdoors and inside huge halls like the New York Armory. Adams's music, combined with a job that I got at the Contemporary Art Museum Mattress Factory, further challenged my work to get off of the traditional recital stage and into unique spaces. I started writing my own music about landscapes and local culture, with musicians literally in the places that inspired the music. I wrote a musical walking tour of Pittsburgh with musicians up in the trees. They were playing the bird songs of the birds at the nearby aviary. Second stop on the tour was a brass quintet playing music inspired by old polka bands that would have paraded through this very park nearly 100 years before. This was just the start of thinking about landscape. I had a growing obsession with Iceland, ever since hearing Björk's music in high school. I even started learning Icelandic. And thankfully, those lessons paid off because I got a Fulbright fellowship and lived in Iceland for a year, which was a total cultural immersion. I started recording everything on my handy digital recorder. I recorded everything I could get my hands on. I collaborated with anyone who was willing. I traveled around the country as much as I could. I didn't even care if the sounds I recorded were musical. On this one track alone, I have the sounds of an Icelandic astrologer, ice shattering in this cave, a fire crackling, a children's hand clapping game, a beatboxer, a guitar, a choir warming up, and me playing the harp and doing improvisations, and then some of the clips I played backwards. Let's hear that.
Use your blitz and run.
That might be all we get today. That's okay. Immersion in the classical and avant-garde Icelandic art scene freed my music even further from feeling like it had to fit in a traditional box of genre or style, or even have a musical score. My works in Iceland are like a diary, because I could have only made those pieces by being in that place at that time. Some of the pieces are quite strange, not unlike Iceland, which is full of contrasts of landscape and sometimes disorienting views. And yes, I did meet Björk, so my life is now complete. My work was branching out into so many different directions that sometimes I didn't even feel like I was even doing classical music anymore. I felt like, oh, there's another Iceland shot. I felt like I was more like crossover musicians like Nico Muhly and Shara Warden of My Brightest Diamond. These people were not like the composers I'd studied in school. They have classical trainings, but they collaborate with bands. They have blogs. They celebrate sexuality, and they take pictures of food for their Instagrams. Having a glimpse into their messy 21st century lives made me want to risk using my own identity as creative material. My doctorate at CU Boulder gave me the tools to do this. I had this idea about writing a piece of music that bears my most intimate moments. And I started thinking, what's most intimate for me? And that's probably sex. And sex is rarely portrayed in classical music. When it is, it's usually for a laugh, or if it's an opera, you can bet it will end in death. But sex is a huge part of my life, and I'm guessing it's probably important to a lot of you too. So I wrote this piece, Tame Your Man. It's a piece for a pianist and a bondage artist. It's semi-autobiographic, and it integrates my music with my experiences as a gay man. Over the course of the work, the pianist gets more and more tied up to the piano until at the last moments of the piece, he can only reach the outermost keys, and he has to use his bare chest to play clusters of notes in the middle of the keyboard. One of the movements has one hand tied behind his back, so he can only use his left hand. I'm gonna play that movement for you, but I'm just gonna hold my hand behind my back. worked really hard to balance the visuals of Tame Your Man with the music and not have one overpower the other. I didn't want it to be a piano solo that happens to have a bondage artist in it, but I also didn't want it to be a fetish piece that happened to have a piano in it. It's probably my favorite work, and I think it's resonated with so many people because it is so personal. It's about trust and communication. It's erotic, but also tender, and it's just a tiny bit controversial. I've had 3 performances of the piece so far in different cities, and the latest video of it on YouTube has gotten over 10,000 views. It did help to have a porn star involved as the latest bondage artist, but in a great coincidence, that guy happens to have a music composition degree from Peabody Conservatory. Now that I had the courage to make the music I wanted, I didn't want it to live in a vacuum and always be this solo effort. I met Pamela Z, who is an LA-based musician, and she uses technology and recorded samples to weave together very modern theater pieces. She recently went to Minnesota to interview rural farmers about their lives in order to make music from it. Her work sparked a realization in my own pieces about community. When other people are involved in the process of making music, all their shared experiences are brought into the final product. I wanted to get people to be a part of making music in places they might not have expected. As the first creative in residence right here, I set up musical interventions in the galleries and the atrium where visitors could make or hear music that was directly connected to what they were seeing visually. You could play handbells that corresponded to the LED numbers of the piece in the other building called NG. You could rustle tree branches and play lonesome cowboy harmonicas up in the American West galleries, another kind of musical atmosphere. Visitors also they recorded a short sample of one musical sound for me, whatever they thought one musical sound might be. I collaged all of those snippets together and I played them back in the bridge that connects these 2 buildings. I enjoyed people being caught off guard as they walked down the hall and they heard these kinds of sounds.
Me, 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 me. Boo, boo. Bop, bop. Beep.
These interventions couldn't really work unless multiple people participated. It was the group effort of everyone contributing that these pieces came together. Sometimes I feel like I'm straddling different fields. There's the traditional world of the concert hall, which I still love, the white box of the art museum that we're in right now, and there's experimental sound art, a sort of catch-all. I'm somewhere in the middle and trying to speak all these different dialects of the art's language. Thankfully, the more people I meet and the more I keep challenging myself, the more I find myself not so much an outsider, but someone in the field. That is quite the change indeed. I'm now offering ideas on music that could give new meaning to audiences in new spaces. I can see better how my experiments with music are part of a long trajectory of creative exploration. I try not to think about changing anyone's mind about classical music, but if you have a conversation about my work later at the dinner table, I consider that a major success. My work changing over 20 years is such a small portion of how classical music has changed over the centuries. That evolution has happened in part due to musicians finding ways for their creations to fit the needs of music in our lives. And that, in turn, inspires others. But it's also a part due to audiences. You all here are a part of deciding what lasts. By interacting with composers and performers and their music, you create change through what you go see, what you support, what you listen to, and what you experience for yourselves. Thank you.